video on the Gestalt school of thought. This is an important school of thought in relation to the study of psychology. The major Gestalt scholars include Max Weber, Kafka, and Wolfgang Kohler. We have to understand the origins of Gestaltism. Basically, Gestaltism began in Germany in the early part of the 20th century. And you have to know that this was when functionalism and behaviorism were also emerging in the United States. And cultural differences played a major role in understanding of society and human psychology. The movement came into being through the efforts, as I've said earlier, Kafka, Weber, Kohler, who adopted a cognitivist approach in the study of perception. You have to read further on that. The theoretical basis of Gestaltism is that Gestalt psychology is anchored on the premises that psychological experiences are a result of the perception of organized wholes rather than individual elements that make up the same wholes. So the term Gestalt is a German word for meaning organized wholes. You will notice that most textbooks will summarize Gestaltism as the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Basically, that's what it means. When you have to know that Gestalt scholars criticized structuralism and functionalism for the use of introspection among other reductionistic approaches in the study of human behavior. And so when you look at Gestalt psychology, you notice that it takes a holistic approach to the study of human behavior with respect to perception. When we look at Gestaltism, you have to understand the Gestalt principles of organization. And these include proximity, similarity, figure ground, common fate, good figure, continuity, closure, and pregnancy. I will develop explanations for each of these principles in due course. When you look at proximity, the principle states that elements that are basically close are seen as belonging to each other more than similar elements that are far away. You will notice when you look at this diagram, these elements, by being closer to each other, they look more similar. Then similarity, this principle explains that similar elements are seen as belonging to each other more than elements equally close but less similar. This is illustrated in the diagram shown. Then we have a figure ground. Figure ground is a Gestalt principle that states that we tend to organize perception in a way that minimizes changes and differences while maintaining unity and wholeness. If you look in your textbooks, when you look at figure ground, you might notice that someone might see a jar, and someone, if you look closely, you will see two faces. One face here, the other one face here, two faces looking at each other. Common fate, this is a principle that is anchored on the fact that elements that move together or are treated alike are perceived as groups. You also notice the same here when you look at these figures. Closure, this principle operates on the premise that people organize their perceptions so that they are as simple and logical as possible, filling gaps in perception where necessary. So when you look at this figure, one is inclined to think that it's a circle by filling in those gaps that have been left behind. Good figure, Elements that form basic good figures are perceived as groups, as shown in the diagram. Then continuity, according to this principle, elements are seen as belonging to each other if they appear to be in a continuation of the direction of previous elements. So when you look at this continuity, you tend to perceive elements that are seen as belonging to each other as if they belong in a continuation or in the direction of the previous elements. We cannot close a discussion on Gestalt psychology without mentioning the applications of Gestalt theory and principles in everyday life. You will notice that Gestalt principles have been applied to learning, and they've also been applied to motivation, and they've been also applied to therapy and counseling. When you look at counseling in a Gestalt theoretical framework, you'll notice when we say the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So when you look at counseling, in order to solve problems, you don't look at those problems as individual problems on their own. You have to look at the environment and all the other aspects that are related to those problems so that you may come up with an understanding of how you can solve these problems. It has also been applied to research methodology as well as applied to thinking and personality. You have to read a bit further on those applications, but basically this is what we mean when we talk about the applications of Gestalt theory to psychological principles. Thank you for listening, and thank you for playing this video. I hope it makes sense and you will gain a bit of knowledge from all the concepts that have been illustrated. Thank you.